mountainous areas. And we have an excellent panel today. On the panel, Dr. Amina Maharzan from EC Mode, Mr. Rohan Shinde from Miyamoto International, and Professor David Rounds from Carnegie Mellon University. So, before we get into the panel discussion, I would like to just set the context by showing some slides of on what research we have been doing at CEW. I am from CEW. I am Vishwas. I lead the climate resilience team at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And we are a not-for-profit public policy think tank based out of India. And I lead the climate resilience team. Under the climate resilience team, and this is what CW's work areas are, starting from low carbon economy, energy transitions, going into quality of life, and our climate resilience team sits right there in the enablers pillar. We are a team of 350 plus now and working across 15 different work areas. So let's see what do we know about mountains in terms of the mountainous regions facing critical challenges. So we all know that the temperature is rising, and I think EC Mode's report on high rise drastically showing the anticipated glacial melt in the high mountain regions of HKH really highlights that point. But I think the critical sectors that get impacted by any minor changes in the temperature are natural resource availability, economy and livelihoods, health and well-being, and critical infrastructure. Because of the remoteness of mountainous regions, I think it is very critical that the resilience of mountain infrastructure is the most important priority for mountainous regions and mountainous countries, because in terms of occurrence of extreme events and extreme disasters, I think critical infrastructure and basic services are the two key important aspects that the mountainous regions have faced several challenges on. Also, in terms of trends in terms of migration, out migration from mountainous regions, and Amina has been studying on migration in Nepal and Indian region, which also highlights key aspects that because of lack of natural resource availability, for example, hilly districts of Nepal are going through severe drought conditions, which impacts their agricultural practices, and these communities have to move then downstream to the nearby cities, and they leave their agricultural practices leave behind and get into some kind of job. So this is also a peculiar trend that we are seeing, the rapid urbanization and infrastructure development that's happening in the downstream areas nearby these mountainous districts or states in Nepal and other parts of the world as well. I think in terms of extreme events, I think they put several impacts on the economy. But in terms of quantifying the impacts, we have seen that the economic losses caused alone by landslides in the Himalayan region is estimated to be more than 1 billion. These kind of landslides and heavy rainfall events are increasing in number, are increasing in frequency, and I think the most recent event from September 27th that occurred, that caused massive rainfall across half of the country of Nepal, and that led to nearly 300 million USD of loss in terms of loss and damage estimate. So I think these are some of the most recent findings that we have. Also, in terms of Uttarakhand floods, which damaged key roads, disrupted the transportation facilities, which put difficulties in accessing the infrastructure services or basic services. Hydropower projects. I think also the Melamchi incidents in Nepal is also really fresh. Nepal was struggling to get the drinking water supply for Kathmandu and nearby regions. The project was undergone. It was undergoing for nearly 20 years, and I think it had just initiated. We all had stopped using tankers for water supply, and due to a massive debris flow, the whole of dam got burst, and the whole water supply project was impacted by it. Now again, the NDRRMA, the reconstruction authority is looking into how do we build that. So if we have put 20 years of efforts and money and resources, and in one incidence only of extreme event, if that all of that is gone, I think it's must that we must consider all of this. Also from Himachal Pradesh, which is a Himalayan state in India, we had nearly 75 flash flood events in only in 2022. So this has been the trend in the recent years, and that's why it is at most important that we look into mountain infrastructure resilience. Now, how do we look into the climate proofing approach for critical infrastructure? And at CW, we have been doing some work in this aspect. Especially, we looked into how do we build infrastructure resilience for healthcare infrastructure. And yesterday we had a panel in the CDRI pavilion on that. We have a report that's out already where we have developed a physical risk assessment framework for assessing the physical risks to healthcare infrastructure. We are on the way to develop the similar framework for transport as well as power distribution and transmission infrastructure as well. So all these entities, which are the main stakeholders of these sectors, critical infrastructure sectors, should be able to do the physical risk assessments on their own and should be able to plan for the adaptation measures as a whole in the different landscapes. So mapping the critical infrastructure assets is the key step. Then we get into the risk assessment framework. Then we have to look into context-specific adaptation solutions. What suits to particular context? We have to look into that. Identify safe corridors and alternative locations where the, in case of a disaster, where we could move, and also best practices. So there is a need for exchange of knowledge and best practices among the different countries. Now, just a glimpse of what we have done so far in the IPC in the risk assessment framework. We have adopted IPCC's AR5 equation of risk assessment, where it comprises hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, where vulnerability is a function of sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So what I would like to highlight here is that in order to reduce the risk, we have to put more efforts in the adaptive capacity part, which is where the governance comes in picture, which is where the decision makers' capacities come in picture, and which is also the role of technology and finance comes into the picture in order to address that. In terms of the risk to healthcare systems in the Indian Himalayan region is primarily the 12 states and 4 districts of Assam state, which comprise Indian Himalayan part. So there are various regions where the risks have been very high. For example, if you see Himachal Pradesh, the risk is very high, also in parts of Uttarakhand. Whereas for Northeast India, so far, the risk landscape has not gone intense. When we look into, importance of early warning systems, nearly 27 states out of 35 states in India are prone to extreme events. And that's where the role of early warnings come in picture, especially for the regions in the mountainous states where you don't have a lot of time to react. You don't have a lot of alternate options to move to. I think that's where early warnings is one of the ways we should integrate that into the infrastructure mechanism currently, and we will discuss more on that. So this is the current distribution of flood early warning systems within the Indian Himalayan region, and we have also mapped flood vulnerability. So the colors in blue show the flood vulnerability in the Indian Himalayan and other parts of India, and the red dots show flood level forecast stations within the region. But we can very clearly see that the distribution is still pretty much along the plains of Himalayan states. It's not really up there in the high mountainous regions where we have challenges like GLOFs, where we have challenges like excessive rainfall, cloudburst event, etc. So we must put more efforts in order to strengthen that infrastructure. Now, how do we look into the barriers and how do we address the barriers? And I think we will also discuss these parts in the panel discussion as well. Because of fragile ecosystems, I think we have to really look into the ways that we deal with the context of that particular landscape. And also, as I said, the land availability is very low. Land availability of suitable areas is very low. So we have to look into where is that we can use and put our infrastructure there. Socioeconomic and political factors due to various socioeconomic implications. I think the whole Himalayan ecosystem has faced several changes in terms of socioeconomical changes. High cost and limited resources is also one of the things. So to address all of that, we think that nature-based solutions could be one of the ways we can strengthen the infrastructure resilience. Also, I mean, social inclusion is equally important in our order to address these risks and blended finance model. So we will also talk about that briefly. So I think that's all from my side. We will quickly show a video that we have from our Faces of Climate Resilience video series, which will highlight how communities are coming together. And that video shows how communities in Uttarakhand state are fighting forest fires on their own. Yeah, so I request Amy to connect the video.
जंगल ही हमारा जीवन है। आने वाली पीढ़ी के लिए, उनके लिए भी ऐसी बनी रहे जैसे हमारे लिए। इसलिए हम जंगलों को बचाने के लिए कोशिश में लगे हुए हैं। मेरा नाम सोनिया बिष्ट है, ग्राम खरकिया। बचपन में तो इतनी ज्यादा धूप तो पड़ती नहीं थी यहाँ। पहले से यहाँ बहुत ठंडा मौसम था, बर्फ बार बार पड़ती रहती थी। लेकिन अब मौसम में चेंज आ गया है। कोई साल पड़ जाती है तो पड़ जाती है बर्फ, वही ज्यादा नहीं पड़ती है। और धूप हमेशा तेज रहती है। धूप तेज रहने से जंगलों में सूखापन ज्यादा हो गया है, इसलिए आग बहुत ज्यादा फैलती है। कितने जल स्रोत ऐसे हैं जो पेड़ों से निर्भर हैं, वो पेड़ सूख जाते हैं आग लगने के कारण, से फिर पानी के स्रोत कम हो जाते हैं।
Forest fire has been the most important challenge forest department has been facing because of the climate change. These extreme conditions, whether it be extreme rainfall or extreme drought situation, are increasing. This period of heat waves, when we have a very long dry spell and extreme temperatures, the length and the longevity of these periods might increase. This may have a direct impact on the probability of the forest fires.
जो औण जो है, हम अपने खेतों की झाड़ पताड़ काटे हाटे सब काट के एक जगह पर इकट्ठा करते हैं, फिर उसको जलाने का कार्य करते हैं। तो वो आग कभी तेज हवाओं के कारण जंगलों तक पहुंच जाती है और बहुत सारा नुकसान हो जाता है हमारा। आग बुझाने का काम महिला मंगल दल ने सन 2003 और 4 से आरंभ किया है। हमें सूचना मिलती है कि वहाँ आग लगी है करके, अपने अड़ोसी पड़ोसियों को बताते हैं कि वहाँ आग लगी है, चलो चलो करके अब बुझाने के लिए, ताकि वो उस पर जल्दी कवर कर सकें, हम आग ज़्यादा ना फैले। जो जमीन पे लगने वाली आग है उसको तो हम पिरूल को साइड करके उसे आग को झांप से मार के उसे बुझाने का प्रयास करते हैं। पेड़ से पेड़ पर आग लगती है, उसे हम फोर्स लाइन क्रॉस करके बुझाने का प्रयास करते हैं। तो आग बुझाने के काम में फॉरेस्टर वालों का और जंगलात वालों की मदद करती हैं।
We need a huge amount of manpower to handle the forest fires. We need a quick response, and quick response can be achieved only if we have good support from the villagers.
औण दिवस हमने 1 अप्रैल को मनाया था। उस दिन हमने ये निर्णय लिया था कि आज के बाद हम औण नहीं जलाएंगे। कहीं पर आग लगती है उसको बुझाते हैं तो हमें बहुत हर्ष का महसूस होता है कि हमने ये काम किया है, क्योंकि जंगल हमारे हैं और हम ही को इनकी रक्षा करनी है।
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention. So I think this is one of the ways that we can engage also with the communities in order to build the community resilience. So let's get into the panel discussion now. On the panel today, we have Dr. Amina Maharjan, who works as a senior livelihood and migration specialist and leads the work on human mobility and migration at ICIMOD since 2015. Amina was also a contributing author to the sixth assessment report of IPCC and has published several peer-reviewed articles on migration, climate change, and agriculture linkage. I think she was also one of the editors of the High-Wise report of Hindu-Kush-Himalayan region, leading the section on social implication of cryosphere change in the region. Amina, please join us. Then we have Mr. Rohan Shinde, who currently holds the position of Head Disaster Risk Reduction at Miyamoto International since 2023, and he's also the team lead of DRR since May 2022. Rohan has extensive work experience in disaster risk reduction and structural engineering. Prior to joining Miyamoto, he worked at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, as senior project research scientist. Rohan, please join us. Thank you. And then we have Professor David Rounds, who's at the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Carnegie Mellon University. He received his BS in Civil Engineering in 2010 and his master's degree in Environmental and Water Resource Engineering in 2012, while he completed his PhD in 2016 in Civil Engineering. He conducted postdoctoral research in the Glaciers Group at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. David, please join us here. Great. Thank you, first of all, for joining us here. And thank you. And maybe those who are sitting can also come to the first row so that the conversation, we are able to listen to it properly. No, sorry. Yeah, great. So I think, we are on day 8 of COP in a way that we have just 2 more days to go. And I would like to open the discussion with you on how has been your experience so far at COP 29. What do you feel? I think most of you are contributing to the adaptation discussion. What has been your observation so far? So maybe we can begin with Amina.
My very first COP experience, so I've been trying to implement quite a bit. I was following the global board and adaptation. I think there has been some progress, some steps somewhere.
Yeah, slightly louder.
I have the biggest problem because I have the smallest voice. So this is my first time in COP. So I'm just getting a hang of how COPs function. And here I've been following mostly on global goal and adaptation, the GGA discussions. And I have found that pretty interesting. It's so far in the text, mountains are also mentioned as one of those critical ecosystems. So happy, and then I'm really looking forward to see how things move forward with that.
Great, thanks, Rohan.
Thanks, Vishwas. So it's a very interesting experience for me as well. So I attended quite a few sessions on DRR and climate change. I attended a few sessions at disaster CDRI pavilion as well. And a lot of learning from different sessions, and good to know that so many countries are contributing towards the common goal of making a resilient infrastructure. It was a great panel discussion yesterday with Vishwas, Ved, and other colleagues on healthcare infrastructure in the system, where we could learn more about how to bring in more finance into the healthcare infrastructure business. And I hope we, whatever connections that we have made this COP, we can continue, till next 1 year, and we could contribute to some concrete report or some project together, and we meet at the next COP with this.
Great, thanks. David, what have been your observations so far?
Yeah, so this is my second experience at COP, and I come more from the academic side of things. So, what we're really trying to do is think about how we can improve projections of glaciers and how that impacts sea level rise and mountain communities through water resources or outburst floods and those types of things. And I'm in a civil and environmental engineering department, so we also try to think through what is the flood modeling, the hazard mapping that we can do. But the reality is that being an academic, it's that translation of that science into the communities, into the engineers that are at the local community level that's so important. That's one of the most inspiring things about being here is that we're surrounded by people that are really focused on that community engagement, that are part of those boundary organizations that can do that translation and that we can work with. And I think that's really critical because for so long we've designed and engineered our systems to just prepare for the past. And so as we think about preparing for the future and making our systems climate resilient, it's really critical that we incorporate that latest knowledge into the planning and management of our systems.
Great, great. Thanks. And I think I will then ask you the first question, David, about, since your work has been focusing more on the like high mountain region and glaciers, I think snow and glacier forms nearly 10 to 12% of the global land cover. And I think glaciers are one of the ecosystems where the changes have been seen at the most rapid pace compared to other ecosystems. So since glaciers are critical water resources in many mountainous communities, how can infrastructure planning balance the need for sustainable water resource management while addressing the climate-related hazards that are occurring?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start by saying that these are decisions that I think need to be really led by the communities and the local officials that are present. What we can do is we can provide estimates as to how things are changing, and so we have projects that are projecting what the changes in glacier runoff look like for the end of the century and how that varies with the different shared socioeconomic pathways. So you can plan for different emission scenarios because we don't know what's going to happen, right? We actually control that here, right? What people pledge to do has a great impact, but then the communities can properly plan for that. And the glaciers are a really valuable resource, especially at the end of the melt season, right? When the snow is gone, when a lot of the precipitation might be gone, depending on the climate system you're a part of. And so that buffer, especially in times of drought, can be really, really important. And as we think through systems in the future, right, we have to think through, okay, what are the glaciers? What is the snow melt looking like? How is that going to vary? And also think about adaptation strategies that might be able to be used as a surrogate for that, right? So is it building new reservoirs that can act as or have the same functionality as the glaciers, or is it, there are other adaptation strategies like ice stupas, for example. Like how can we work with local communities to provide that redundancy and really a substitute for the glaciers, because we're going to lose some of the glaciers, and so planning for it is really what we need to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I will come to you, Amina. Thanks, David, for highlighting the importance of glacier. And also, Amina, you have been the editor in the Highwise report. If you would like to highlight some of the challenges, the unique challenges that the mountain region face, and that complicates the infrastructure development in such regions. And if you would like to also link it with some of the observations that you have from Highwise analysis. Yeah.
Thank you, Vishal. Thank you, David, for setting that space. I don't have to talk about the fast-paced science now. And again, looking back to your presentation, in mountain, we have to consider the development aspirations. Most of the development aspiration, urbanization, infrastructure growth, I think is going to happen. But what's going to be important is, I don't know about unique, but I would say new things that we have highlighted in our report is the risk, the dynamics of risk have changed. But then the way we are assessing risk, that has not changed. That's not matching with what's happening now. We are still looking at hazard as one, whereas we are seeing more and more. Look at Chamoli, Melamchi, or Sikkim. Multiple of this. What we are saying is risk is now where we have to consider multiple hazards, and what you call multi-hazard and this cascading hazards. Because it's one event triggering another event, but I don't think that we have really moved our risk assessment models or even our policies to really match with these new emerging trends of risk. And this is one thing that we have highlighted in our report as well. Because unless we do that, because infrastructure is massive investments, right? So, and something again, what David is mentioning, those cryospheric changes, be it glacier or permafrost, that's something we know even lesser in HKS region. These are, I mean, these changes will continue next 2 decades, even if we have zero emission today now, because these are irreversible changes. And what I understood from my glaciologist colleagues is for the glaciers to revert back to present context of people, they say that probably takes a couple of million years, which means to say these are long-term changes that we have to just live with. So I think it's important that we start to reflect on our policies and our assessment these changes. And also something that came up in one of our informal discussions that I was having with particularly the transport sector people who work on those infrastructure and the hydropower sector, because that's something again is in that works. Environmental impact assessments, the way we do it now, these are not going to be sufficient. Again, because all of this undermines the risk that we are actually facing. And this is where, again, we need to broaden. And as a social scientist, what baffles me is when you do all this risk assessment, you are thinking only of this infrastructure, whereas you're completely, when this infrastructure fails, the impact, and this is where cascading impacts become very important. This is going to impact all the downstream and nearby communities, right? Their lives and livelihoods. And this is something we have experienced time and again, last 5 years at least. So when we are doing assessments and impact assessments in particular, we have to broaden not only of the infrastructure, but also what are the other systems. So really thinking about systems rather than only design and engineering fixes, trying to understand that systems, and that systems thinking is where I think we have to move forward. And this is where, that cascading impact, because if that does not happen, and this is now an anecdotal evidence I'm bringing from Mustang in Nepal, because the breeze failed, and the breeze caused more damage than the flash floods. And the societies where they were mad because they lost their houses, they lost their so much of infrastructure and others because the breeze went, right? So what kind of this additional impact? If that is not done, then my biggest fear is this is going to increase the social tensions. And that's something I don't think that we really can move. And lastly, maybe one point, when we're talking about infrastructures, be it road, hydropower, whatever, the water, because hydropower uses water. And I think with this, my colleagues who work on hydrology, they are saying that peak water would be reached by 2050. After that, overall water is going to decline. So the competition for water is going to increase as well. What essentially we are saying is this might end up displacing certain vulnerable marginal groups of people who are so much dependent on those water resources. So we have to look into the future, because future, the glaciologists, the cryosphere scientists have given us that different scenarios. But what about the aspiration of people? So how do we match? So I think more systems thinking is what we do.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amina, for covering that in pretty much in detail. And I think also thanks for highlighting that important aspect of climate security that is evolving also in these regions in terms of lack of resources that are available that puts additional pressure on people. And with these kind of disasters, then it's going to be really a challenging situation to deal with. But I mean, so in terms of problems, I think we have been able to identify that lack of resources, also the additional pressure, and in general, being located in such situations or such landscapes is already a place where the disaster is likely to occur. So with that, I would just like to come to you, Rohan, in terms of your experience at Miyamoto. What are some of the best practices of resilient infrastructure development in the mountainous regions and vulnerable areas that you have seen? If you would like to share some more.
Thanks, Ufar. So I'll start with the example of India. So as you know, in India, there is a lot of hilly towns and mountains. Around 20% of the area is under mountainous region. And most of this area is seismic zone 4 or 5, right? It is like very highly vulnerable, even in Nepal, like highly vulnerable to earthquakes. Earthquake is just one part, and then it, as you said, it triggers landslide. If there is a rain, then there is a lot of flood is also there. So these are like 3, 4 hazard, like they happen all at once, like if it happens. So critical. So building a disaster resilient infrastructure is very critical. For that, there are building codes which are available, even for the transportation sector, even for the power station, or the healthcare industry. Uh, but the problem on the field is uh, the local engineers, yeah, in the private sector, as well as the municipal engineers. They are not competitive enough, to understand those codes and implement in the field. That is one part. And the second part is at the implementation level, there is no enforcement by law, right? There is nobody to check or inspect whether these codes are followed or not. So these are two critical areas, right? So everything is there, as David said, that that collaboration between the academician and the practicing engineers, it has to be done properly. So that gap we found on the to build infrastructure resilient. Special attention should be given to the foundations, because most of these buildings, the infrastructure are on the sloping ground. So there are different types of foundation, like cut and fill foundation, raft foundation, deep foundation. We need to do the soil site investigation before building. Then we have to dig deep. We need to identify the areas where the soil is not coming out. So all these studies we have to do before building any critical facility of importance. So all these practical things we have to implement on the field, right? Secondly, for one more example, there was an earthquake in Sikkim in 2011, big devastating earthquake. I was working with NDMA and IIT Bombay at that time. So we worked very closely with the Prime Minister's office. And as soon as the earthquake, they sent NDRF to the, to the earthquake area, to central area.
Yeah.
They sent all the helicopters and all, because there were landslides and they couldn't send the vans and all. But the interesting part was there was no damage near the epicenter. Either the buildings were very strong, population was not there. So here comes the equation of risk is hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Exposure was not there. Vulnerability was less vulnerable building. So what we did immediately for 24 hours, we did a rapid landslide risk assessment, risk assessment. We plotted the color-coded heat maps, the GIS. We send it immediately to NDMA. So you are looking at the wrong place. You need to look here. Right? So using our maps, they change the direction of their helicopter. They perform the rescue operations, and they provided the supplies to the right area. So this happened post disaster. But if we do such earthquake risk, landslide risk, or flood risk assessments beforehand as a disaster preparedness, and make it available for the government authorities and the local communities, then people are already aware that okay, these are the high risk areas, and as soon as there is a disaster, we know where to guide our resources rather than wasting a critical time in the time of the disaster. Right? So pre-disaster studies are also very much important. And one more example I want to give: we last year we completed one project in Papua New Guinea of hydropower resilience. It was again a mountainous area. And for that, we did the rehabilitation of hydropower plant, and we considered, like we said, the multi-hazards like flood, landslide, earthquake, wind, and all the effect of all these hazards on that hydropower station. And accordingly, we gave recommendations of retrofitting and rehabilitation, so that in future, if there is any disaster, so there is no, damage to the infrastructure. So all these points, like we have to take care while implementing it.
Thanks, Rohan, for highlighting that. And I think especially the gap of lack of capacity. I mean, policies do exist, but how to translate that in practice, and that's where the important role of capacity building, role of technology, and role of financing also to some extent is, I think, very important. And with that view, I would like to ask David, like, the role of policymakers in your view, that the role of policymakers should play in ensuring the implementation of science-based sustainable infrastructure solutions in mountainous regions. So how do we bring that science into the practices, and what is the role of policymakers in that process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it varies across scales, right? So at a very high level scale, we are here in order to do a lot of the mitigation work that can avoid the most hazardous, the highest risks, right? To bring that down such that what we do when we start implementing adaptation strategies, perhaps they can be more cost effective. We don't have to plan for as much glacier loss or as much flooding or extreme heat or whatever it is that the hazard is that you're trying to face. So that's the one end. On the other end, I think it's a lot of, at local politics or community level or even national level, the organizations there, as they can start to incorporate the latest science, and typically that is science that's vetted through things like the IPCC assessment reports or through knowledge hubs like ECMOD, right? You have this really authoritative source of knowledge that you can then bring into the planning process. I think that's critical. And that's also where, for me and for the community that I represent of, glaciologists, that's where we try to bring our work to, because we are not the ones that are best suited to work with the communities, right? That's not the role that any of us are designed to play or have been trained to play. And so it's really trying to make the knowledge available and accessible so that people can plan accordingly. And the other thing I think I heard really well that I think is important to note is that the communities know the hazards that they're dealing with, right? I did my PhD in the Everest region of Nepal, in the Khumbu region, and we were looking at Imjasho and thinking about glacier outburst floods. And in working with the community, when we went up there, we actually found that there was a glacier outburst flood that happened not from Imjasho, but from a glacier nearby. And that immediately turned and became the attention as to what was the hazard of this glacier outburst flood, what is the risk, how can we think about that hazard moving into the future. And when we started having discussions, they said, oh yeah, we have experienced that before, right? We've seen events like that before, but they didn't cause the amounts of exposure and hazard that needed to be actionable, right? And at that time, it had just been the Gorka earthquake, and so they were more interested in the landslides and the other hazards. And so tailoring the work that we do as scientists, and sometimes recognizing when we are not the best people to respond to what the community actually needs, I think is very important.
Thanks, David, for highlighting that fact. I think, that's where the role of collaboration comes in, where multi-stakeholder processes need to evolve. It's not that everybody will do everything, and that should not be the case as well. Like scientists should do science, practitioners should look into the practices and informing the practices. And then communities should also come forward and say that, okay, this is working, this is not working. So some sort of feedback mechanism should also be there in order to then, as the climate risks are evolving, we also evolve our decision-making practices in that sense. So I think, with that, I would like to come to Rohan on how do we, Miyamoto has been doing some technology-related solutions as well. So how do we bring innovation and technology for building resilient infrastructure in the mountainous regions? And if you would like to give some examples of your experience.
So recently we participated in the World Landslide Forum last year. So our team went to Italy for a presentation, and we formed a group in India with all India Institute of Disaster Management and also National Institute of Disaster Management (NIDM). So we are collaborating to undertake landslide studies all across India. So we are identifying the hotspots in different regions, like and collaborating with local partners in each state. And we are using the technology of GIS mapping of all these hazards and reducing the risk maps using the GIS technology. And we are taking a lot of input from the local community as well. For example, our team went to the Kerala Wayanad as well and took input from there. We are planning to travel to Uttarakhand and Joshimath as well. And so we are, collecting data from the field and producing we are the end product should be a land risk atlas like in Road. And we are also conducting webinars along with NIDM. Every 2 months, we are calling experts from around the world to talk about the landslide or talk about the resilience in the mountains. And all these and different technologies, putting it together in a kind of a report or something, and making it available to the public. And we are also planning some capacity building workshops at the local level. We are translating the knowledge from the academia to the community level and call the experts, and so that people are, made aware of the risk. So all these things we are doing on the field, the mountains.
Yeah, great. I think I will just follow up question on that. So I think there are several organizations which might be like you are doing the mapping of landslides. We did at EC mode we were doing the mapping of fire risk hotspots, forest fire risk hotspots. So in your view. And I think Miyamoto is a partner with CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So on those lines, in your view, what are the ways in which global collaboration could be harnessed out of these kind of processes, and what are the ways data sharing could be leveraged in a far better manner?
So at CDRI, if you are aware, they are developing a platform called as GIRI, Global Infrastructure Resilience Index. So one of our team members is also supporting on GIRI, at Urban Resilience Specialist. So at GIRI, what we are doing, we are collating data from all across the world of different hazards and putting it together on a world map. We are also collaborating with Global Earthquake Model, GEM, for earthquake data, collaborating with different country officials for the local country data. Putting it together on the GIRI platform so that if you go to the website of GIRI, you can find your country and find the hazard in your country. And that data can always be modified and refined as we get data. That is one of the ways. And also, there are a lot of fundings from CBRI or World Bank or Asian Development Bank in particular to work in the mountain field, where as a private sector, different organizations can work together, and on some grant or some project in the same setting.
Great, thank you. So, as a part of the National Adaptation Plan formulation process in Myanmar, I was involved in the process in 2017-18. And just to highlight the remoteness of landscapes. So, we were asked to do a study on Hakka as a Chin state actually, and Hakka is a major township that had faced a landslide and landslip actually because of heavy rainfall, which caused Hakka township to cut it from the rest of the Chin state for 7 days. So there was no communication by road, there was no access by road to Hakka township, which is the which is the capital of Chin state, for 7 days when this incident occurred. And then that's how Myanmar government that time got to know that, okay, these kind of severities exist, which also need to be reflected in the National Adaptation Plan process when they were putting it together. So that's how then they asked ICIM to come up with that study, and it is also one of the important studies that is always cited from Myanmar. So this is the reality. Like sometimes if we are not aware of what are the likely implications of it, we might not be better prepared for it. And I would like to come to you, Amina, with that question that also, ICIMOD has been doing assessments like HIMAP, also HiWise. So going forward as a regional data hub and regional knowledge organization, what are the ways that you see ICIMOD playing that key role within the Hindukush Himalayan region in order to bring multiple stakeholders together? And also, are there any plans of such scientific assessments in near future?
Absolutely. The regional mandate, this is something we do take seriously. And for cryosphere, for instance, we have set an ambitious goal that if you want to do a cryosphere monitoring, country by country, we can do it. But then, so many of these, we are talking about blocks, they're very small blocks. In 2016, the lake was in Tibet. But then the loss and damage is mostly happening in Nepal. So that transboundary aspect is so important because, in high mountains, nature doesn't care about countries' boundaries, right? So something that we will have to accept. And this is where now we are aiming to have probably come up with maybe a kind of SOP to do a cryosphere monitoring at a regional level and do as much saving as possible. Because otherwise, it's very difficult to address the challenges that we are seeing now and in future just by a single country. So, and if you look at the, you mentioned about glacier lakes, the number of glacier lakes that exist in this region, 50,000 plus, how many of them are actually being monitored closely? Less than 30. Potentially dangerous glacier lakes, that is what has done. We have mapped out how many of them we are actually monitoring. 5. So that's the level of knowledge that we have. A lot of monitoring that we do is through satellites. And if you understand mountain topography, it's extremely difficult because it's just so diverse, right? So I think for that, regional collaboration is important, and this is where we believe that having a system in place where we can actually pool whatever resources countries and other institutions are putting together. That's going to be important, and that's something that we hope to achieve next year. So that's one of the ways top down, I would call it. But that's not going to be sufficient because it's not only work for the mountain but also the people, and this is where bottom up approach also becomes critically important. And what you mentioned, David, local knowledge, amazing, inspiring, depth of knowledge. But what I'm beginning to understand is local knowledge is also grappling with the rapidity of change. For local knowledge, that knowledge is gained slowly over a period of time. But if you look at the rapidity of change, people are like struggling to, and now people are using, I'm literally quoting, they are saying we don't understand the seasons anymore because those does not exist. We don't understand our villages anymore because the landscape that we live in, that is not existing anymore, right? So things that like this word now is getting timing again, unprecedented. We have never heard it because if you look at societal history, it's maximum 300, 400 years. Beyond that, because we don't have a written, ways of writing. So most villages, they understand till the grandmother's time, what the grandmother has heard. 300 years, 400. So within that 3, 4, 500 years, it's something that they have never heard. So these incidences are common. And so it's important to understand that yes, communities understand a lot, but this is where I think the scientific community also needs to come and play its role. So what everyone you are saying and David, you are saying about that modeling, and also, when you, I wouldn't say blend, when you not integrate it, so that's a wrong word, blend, really. Bring these two sources of knowledge, that's when I think things starts to work out. Because what I heard, something that Vishwas and myself, when we are working together, we keep talking that, can you give me that modeling downscale to village? He's like, no. Just precision, you can throw it out. What is the way? Because we don't have time to wait for science to pick up. And then we said, okay, then let's do what the models are saying, use it as an indicator. Now let's go back to the communities, what they think is going to happen. Let's see if there is convergence, and then probably start to build. And this is something, again, I'm happy that we get the chance again to work together, really looking into the future and bringing, different ways of knowing, so that policies also, there is, we call it with a big P and a smaller P. Big P is more at national level, at the broad policies. also critically important the small the plannings that's happened at local level. We need to work at progress, and we can still have regional progress. Regional progress doesn't mean it's only with the government, but we can also have local government, communities, and research and practitioners like us working together. And this is where I think we need to really move ahead, looking at the challenge, complex challenge that we are towards.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for all the panelists. If any last closing remarks from your side, or also if the audience has been very attentive. If you also have any questions, please. I think your topic of area is also HKH region. Yes.
So, just to Amina. So all knowledge, whether it is science, it is traditional or otherwise, is not necessarily scientific. It's not necessarily scientific. Furthermore, when you are exposed to traditional knowledge, where the traditional knowledge has not been exposed to difficulties that we are encountering constantly and changing every day, how are you able to differentiate between a non-scientific knowledge, those knowledge which should be discarded, from knowledge that should be taken forward?
I have slightly different people, and in mountain people live very closely with the nature because we don't have a choice. So we do understand. And for me, an inspiration was a discussion in Ladakh. So colleagues, glaciologist colleagues have been saying the glaciers are melting. Ladakh and in Nepal, Langtang. And they're saying that's something visible that we know. Because when I was young, the person that I was telling you was saying a period of 30 years, the glaciers used to be here. Now, if you measure, it's about 2 kilometers it has receded. But if you tell science, it's also very simple. And similar exercise we did for avalanche. So we asked our Norwegian colleagues who work on avalanche modeling, guys, can you tell us where are these hotspots? So they did all the modeling, and I'm telling you honestly. And they said that, you know what? This is what we can give you. I said, can you give me where are those hotspots in that sense? And they said, actually, no. We also did, we asked the communities saying that historically, where are these avalanche hotspots? Where are those paths that we feel? And we actually put it together. And there was actually a match. What modeling has done and what the communities are saying. And there is a, I would say, how we define science. And this is why I don't use the term science, but different ways of knowing and learning. And they had, that logic was there. They said, this is safe. And they said, because there is a hill that is going to protect this business. So people were using their knowledge of the topography to assess the avalanche risk and where to make their settlements. And I think that recognition of that knowledge is going to be important. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on science. Knowledge is where it matters, And this is where I think we have to come more together. The problem is if you want something, let's say in Ladakh, particularly the Western science, let me put it that way, if we are defining science in that sense. At the moment, they can't. They can't do a modeling at that small scale. This is something that I come more from social science. Colleagues who do more climate modeling, they say that we can't because we just don't have the data. And if it is not existing, what is available? So let's make the best of what is given. And I think this is the way forward for now. So I refrain from using the term science, but I would say knowledge. And this is where we need to focus. And it's amazing in Ladakh when people say that in 30 years, these glaciers are gone. So we have two options. Either we need to find an alternative source of water, and that's what they were doing desperately. And this is not the village where ice tubers are actually tried, it's another one. And they are doing that at small scale, but then that scale is a problem. Otherwise, they said that otherwise there's no option. We just have to make it. Because for them, they keep looking at the glaciers every decade, how these are receding. It's very clear to them. And I think this is where that knowledge is what we need to focus.
Any other questions from audience? Or
If I may, I think that's a great point, is that we have this knowledge gap, right? And one of the most exciting things that we have really going on right now is the development of so much low-cost sensors, as well as low-cost transmission of that data, such that we can get data on a cell phone quickly, right? Because the high mountains, they are located so far away that it often is a challenge in order to even transmit that data to where the people are. And so I think low-cost sensing is a really wonderful way that we can start to bridge that gap. I also think that satellite images, as you mentioned, satellites are getting better. Models are starting to be able to incorporate real-time information, digital twins of models. Now, getting to the right scale, right, that's another problem. But as we get more and more data, we can start to bring it in and tailor those models. And whether that knowledge is coming from that existing data, or if you can use some of that more local knowledge in order to be able to have a qualitative check on your model, as you mentioned with the avalanche example, can go a really, really long way. So I think there's this definite merger, and I think there's lots of opportunities. But at the same time, it's not going to be done for all communities at once. And so being able to figure out examples of the most vulnerable communities who need this information or who have the capacity for that and use that as an example that can then be shown and replicated, I think is a very powerful system and path forward.
Yeah. Great. Any from you?
No, that's really a great solution, like the merging of technology with the community, and yeah. So we have to all the discussion like we did right now. It has to be implemented on the field. That is matter. We discuss here and it goes like it doesn't go anywhere, right? So we have to make sure that the knowledge translates at the grassroots level. Thank you so much. Thanks, Vikrant, for taking.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. And thanks to the panelists for making out time despite of their busy schedules and joining us for this interesting conversations. Going forward, so just in terms of way forward, we also had similar such panel discussions, 4 of them last year at COP28, and 3 of them we were able to convert them into a T20 brief under Brazilian G20 presidency. So we would be also happy if you are interested in putting this converting this into either a paper or a scientific brief kind of thing, and I will be in touch with you on that, and we can continue to collaborate further. So thank you. Thank you, and I think may I request Jalak to get a photo.